Okay, we started recording. So hi, Larry, again, and thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me.
Sure.
We were just before I started recording, started talking about dialogue systems because it has been a passion for both of us for a long time.
Yeah.
You have done a lot of important work for dialogue, both in academia and industry, mainly. So. In my opinion, it's very exciting times. We are going into this like new stage, new phase for dialogue-related work. And what do you think? How do you feel about the recent latest advancements in the language modeling literature and their implications for dialogue?
Yeah, I mean,
are we solving the problems, or?
I think we're making lots of progress on problems. I think there's a lot more problems to solve, but yeah, I mean, I'm super excited like you are. I think that there's a few surprises for all of us in terms of the ability of these large language models,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that we can train the way they're trained, which is a simple prediction of the next word kind of thing, but with sufficiently powerful representations in the models and then massive amount of data. The amount of ability, the breadth of ability of the models and the depth in terms of the understanding of the language is remarkable. I mean, it's so I'm super excited. To me, it's kind of provides a platform that we can build now on for dialogue systems, because I think there's a lot of things to do specifically in dialogue systems.
And what are some of the things that you find very exciting? Like, what are some of the things that are not beyond the language models, but related to language models that you think would be super exciting to keep pondering on?
Yeah, I think for a long time, as a dialogue community, we've been thinking about this question of how do you actually open up the language so that you can have even in task-oriented domains. You're trying to make a restaurant reservation. Most of our work was on recovering from errors because the person's language deviated from what we thought they were going to be talking about. And so and also, years ago, we would think about each separate application where we'd start from scratch. You have no data. You're trying to build up this, hotel reservation system from scratch. And so when we start collecting data, not only are you trying to learn how people talk about hotels, but you also have to try to learn all the sort of social side of how people communicate with such little data, right?
Mm-hmm,
So for me, this is kind of like solving this broad open domain kind of language interaction problem that takes care of that for us, that then we can build on top of it something like hotel reservations, right? The whole notion of chit chat being separate from task-oriented models, to me, is sort of an exciting thing to think about, that I think these things have kind of come together. We don't have to necessarily be thinking about these separately now.
mm-hmm. Yeah, that was something that I was looking forward to, thinking that like we do make the different separation or differentiation between these two types of systems, thinking that we do need different methods to handle them. But from the user's perspective, they don't really know if they can chit chat or they can complete the task. So bringing them together as a capability of these language models, I think is, I agree with you. And what are some of the things that still remain as a challenge? I mean, you said recovery from errors. I've been thinking about like along the lines of maybe keeping track of state, maybe explicitly or implicitly. But what are some of the challenges that you think we should still spend some time figuring out?
I think the notion of and this goal of aspiration of building personal assistant still is in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
Over the years that you and I and many others have worked on personal assistants, I don't know how many times I've been in discussions with product managers where I would say, this is not really a personal assistant. We're building something that's more sort of generic. It doesn't really know about you or adapt to you or get better for you specifically. It's built with sort of a librarian kind of model and or a search kind of model. And I think that's still true now with the large language models, and maybe even more so, because we've it's been wonderful that have now a much more unified and broad coverage kind of model for interactions and dialogue turns that we can use. But I think from a perspective of a personal assistant, right, we have a lot of work to make the models, much more personal to you, and even backing up from that, much more, much higher quality in terms of accuracy for specific domains and tasks, right? So a lot of work that needs to be done there to kind of, and there's a bunch of different methods that are techniques that people are already starting to work on in these areas, because I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, to go after for this, but it's still in front of us. The domain specific. Another way of thinking about, there's another way of saying this, is that we have now remarkable coverage with these large language models, but if you want to be really accurate in some applications, you do need to be really accurate. And by accurate, I mean for the individual, you really know what they want, or what they were just talking about yesterday. You want to make sure that you're accurate in the sense that you remember that. We have a lot of things in front of us to develop.
And yeah, and especially because you brought up the personalization, like one thing that I keep thinking about is like people there are like details to every task, and then people also do things differently. So that is like some gaps like still staying in my mind.
Yes.
Because the backends, like the thing that completes a task, like it's now people are talking about tool formers that call APIs or LangChain and so on. But the amount of APIs should be so large to be able to cover all forms of like different requests. And maybe the detailed things that people would want, like a personal assistant would do this so much easily. And if that would be possible, like if that scale of different APIs could be possible, I think it could be very interesting. But of course, the model should be able to support from the people's preferences side as well.
Yeah, and thinking about the approaches in that kind of problem, the so-called augmented language models or neurosymbolic language models is promising, because rather than thinking that we have to build everything into the pre-trained models, I mean, you think about that, right? How would you do that at the personal level or personalized level? It just, there's, it kind of pushes you down this direction to say, well, let's leverage, this general language model, this pre-trained language model, but then, let's augment that language model with downstream, more tailored models, the right tool for the right job, which are more domain specific, task specific, and individual specific. So this kind of architecture, I think that's emerging is going to be really useful for this kind of problem, personal assistant kind of problem.
Yep, exactly. And then for task completion, like I was mentioning in the beginning, with all of those tooling, I mean, it's kind of like an open question in my mind. That this is something that I think about a lot these days also. But we used to have a lot of pipelining, like tracking the state or controlling not just the individual turns, but the overall course of the dialogue. So any suggestions, like moving on both to the machine learning researchers or the dialogue people, on whether to go like to still continue like that form of like pipeline approaches, which are good in terms of having control, but may not be ideal.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, I think control is a good word, because if you think about the pre-trained language models as a platform or a foundation that you can build on, there's sort of, you can control it downstream post process, which is where most of the work is right now, and then what we were just talking about with augmented language models. And so then, if it's a dialogue state tracking, then, you're doing downstream, maybe fine tuning or other types of models where they're much, much smaller, but they're still leveraging the power of the really large pre-trained language models. They're just focusing on, this tracking the state of the dialogue, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think that kind of thing is really important. I guess there's the other side of that, which is, think about control like a steering wheel. There's steering wheel downstream, sort of post process, and then I still think there's potential for injecting a steering wheel upstream, further upstream. If you think about it, right, the pre-trained language models, and even going back further to, or the GPT style models, and even going back further to BERT style models, Chris Manning's team did a really nice analysis of what's actually going on and what's being learned in terms of the representation and the layers. And all of that is being learned just to do a better job of predicting the next word, which is amazing, right? You have enough data. But there's all that's been learned, which is, things like co-reference resolution and all the syntactic kind of parsing capabilities that we think of as sort of, historically, we think of as separate components that we would use. They're being learned just to be a better feature representation so that we can do this next word prediction. We could leverage a lot of that. In fact, maybe, attach the steering wheel up there as well, perhaps. And the advantage of that could be, much, much smaller and efficient models, and more, because you're controlling, what the language model is going to produce, that what we're doing right now is have to deal with downstream, just sort of hope that the pre-trained language models are going to have a really good recall. So you have lots of different options downstream, so that then you can sort of tease apart what you want and pull out what you want, And so and you can do that. Of course, it's, a lot of success, but it's really big and potentially wasteful in terms of compute and parameters. If you're worried about much more compact models, maybe doing some more things upstream would be better.
In my mind, I'm kind of like tying it, not necessarily sure if you're hinting in that direction, but something that I know you have, you're the first person that I heard from, like, okay, let's teach the machine how we would do things, or how we would want it to respond or react. And although there have been like some more work later on, but are you kind of like connecting it to there in sense of control, in the sense like the space is huge, but there are like certain ways to do these things, and then if we do have that level of control, but how do we, like, what do you think about then getting to how do we learn?
I think that's I've been thinking a lot about that. If you think about, let's just think about downstream, where you're at the individual, you're at the person, and so you have a downstream with the whole pre-trained model, and then downstream augmented language models. You have developed personal assistant. The large language model has general capabilities and knowledge that's impressive, but it's not going to know everything about you and what your preferences are, and certain ways that you say things, or certain things that are really important to you. So way downstream, you empower the end user, the unskilled, not an AI expert, it's just a customer, to actually teach in, which again, it's this really nice capability of large language, natural language. So they can actually have a conversation and say, no, I didn't really mean that, I meant this, or this particular, I want you to tell me what the scores are of my son's soccer games, so I want you to really keep track of that, and kind of give me regular updates, something that only I really, or a small number of people would care about, something way downstream, but being able to teach it, but through natural language and by example. But then being able to sort of percolate that knowledge back up into as far as you can, up into the big model in a privacy preserving way, but, in a way that, and also sort of generalizing some of what I'm teaching it so that it's useful for other people. So that, if somebody else, let's say it's a certain specific kind of way of saying something, that I'm referring to, and like, let's say I want to buy back row seats to go see, a movie at the theater. And, I'm interacting with my personal assistant, and it understands everything except for it doesn't really understand what I mean by back row seats. And so I said, well, let me show you what I mean, so you bring up a little widget and you circle the back row, and it's just some concept like that. If I can teach it, and let's say 100 or 1,000 other people can also kind of go through that kind of exercise where they know this is what I mean by sitting in the back, or all the different ways people would say that, then someone else that never even had to spend the time to teach it that, it just works for them, right? So it's sort of this idea of this hierarchical model that goes all the way down to individuals, and that, but then the knowledge can percolate back up, and everybody benefits. This kind of, and I think that is really more possible now with the large language models than it has been, because the interface is finally, there, the natural language interface for users.
I see. That's interesting. And then you mentioned generalization. When you were starting to talk about generalization to other people, I was also thinking to other tasks like real human assistants. You ask them some, like maybe they learn one bit of information about you, but they can apply it to all the tasks that they're gonna do in the future. So that could also be something that is that would be useful. Like you just teach once.
And then flip it. It's like some of those tasks that are very related to each other, like filling forms, that kind of thing. I fly in Delta, but I also fly in American. If I'm interacting with Delta form, then the American form should work instantly, or that kind of simple thing. But then you can start extending that to all kinds of other downstream, very specific tasks that they're just so related to each other through language and conceptually that I think now we can really go after those kinds of generalizations.
Exactly. Okay, so these are all great, but in the interest of time, what do you think some of the things that I should be asking about as a kind of like for the next generation or this generation to build on towards dialogue systems with using the power of the language models and other recent advancements?
So one of the, if you think about it, you and I are interacting right now in a very rich way because we can see each other, and we can see each other's expressions. I can use my hands. I can, that's a really important part of the communication. And yet most of what we're seeing right now is, of course, text, text back and forth. And so the richness of ability, not just to express, but also in terms of emoting, intent, but also being able to, of course, interpret, I think is really interesting. And, building digital humans that have that kind of ability, both the interpretation and the ability to emote, I think is going to be really interesting. And then expanding that further to say, well, not only do we learn, can we benefit a lot in terms of understanding each other by seeing each other and being able to express, but perhaps being able to look at a shared content where I want to share with you. Let's say that we're both looking at a scientific paper and we're having a discussion about it. Being able to, and I'm talking about with a personal assistant. Personal assistant is reading the paper and looking at the paper, and I'm looking at the paper, and we're having a discussion about this particular plot or graph or table or something. And you can do so much. Of course, the large language models can do a reasonable job of reading the text of the papers and you know, and even some of the tables and be able to answer questions. But to get really high accuracy, you know, let it actually share that content, and so then it becomes situated. So all the things that we've done in the past, you know, worked on, situated. I think that's now even more promising. With
And maybe possible. Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. Okay, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, likewise.